this morning is Psalm 71. In you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Rescue me and deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me and save me. Be my rock of refuge to which I can always go. Give the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. Deliver me, O my God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of evil and cruel men. For you have been my hope, O sovereign Lord, my confidence since my youth. From my birth I have relied on you. You brought me forth from my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. I have become like a portent to many, but you are my strong refuge. My mouth is filled with your praise, declaring your splendour all day long. Do not cast me away when I am old. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone. For my enemies speak against me. Those who wait to kill me conspire together. They say, God has forsaken him. Pursue him and seize him, for no one will rescue him. Be not far from me, O God. Come quickly, O my God, to help me. May my accusers perish in shame. May those who want to harm me be covered with scorn and disgrace. But as for me, I shall always have hope. I will praise you more and more. My mouth will tell of your righteousness, of your salvation all day long, though I know not its measure. I will come and proclaim your mighty acts, O sovereign Lord. I will proclaim your righteousness, yours alone. Since my youth, O God, you have taught me, and to this day I declare your marvellous deeds. Even when I am old and grey, do not forsake me, O God, till I declare your power to the next generation, your might to all who are to come. Your righteousness reaches to the skies, O God, you who have done great things. Who, O God, is like you? Though you have made me see troubles, many and bitter, you will restore my life again. From the depths of the earth, you will again bring me up. You will increase my honour and comfort me once again. I will praise you with the harp for your faithfulness, O my God. I will sing praise to you with the lyre, O Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy when I sing praise to you, I, whom you have redeemed. My tongue will tell of your righteous acts all day long, for those who wanted to harm me have been put to shame and confusion. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
To switch yourself on, it turns out. It's about heads in prayer. Heavenly Father, we pray now that you pour out your Spirit upon us. Help us to hear and receive your word. Take it into our hearts and show it forth in our lives to your glory, honour and praise and to our blessing. We ask it in your name, Jesus. Amen. So if you can turn in your Bibles to Psalm 71 that you've just had read, it's on page 584 in your Pew Bibles, page 584. The Bibles, of course, will self-clean in the week that we're not inside. So that's why we've taken the decision that they can be handed out. And it's always a good idea to check when somebody's preaching to you that what they're saying is there in the Word rather than just something they've made up themselves. I'm not actually supposed to be preaching today. I'm supposed to be leading. Matthew's supposed to be taking some relaxing time, and Matt Rowley is meant to be preaching, but instead he's taking the relaxing time, if you could call it that, because he's in self-isolation as a result of his son Isaac testing positive for coronavirus. He's not super poorly, but these things have to be done. Matthew has divided up our psalms with a series of themes, and has assigned to this psalm the theme of mission. So that's what we're going to look at as we look at our psalm, Psalm 71. The first thing to say is that I was sharing this with Matthew earlier, that there was a guy who was called to a cathedral. He was asked to preach, and he didn't really want to go at all, but the dean had used the bishop to leverage everybody, so every vicar had to go and preach on a rota. He thought it was a splendid idea. So this minister stood up and he said, on today I have taken as my text Psalm 119, which, if you know it, has 176 verses in. I will read it through, and as any good evangelical preacher, I'll read my text a second time. So he did. And then he proceeded to do a line-by-line exposition. 4 hours later, with only the dean left in the cathedral, he turned and said, "So, Mr. Dean, I think you'll not be inviting me again." Well, the good news is I'm not planning to preach on every single line in this 24-verse psalm. But it does tell us something very important about the way that we share the good news of Jesus. First of all, of course, if you think about mission, however you feel about it, ultimately, mission, whether it's by deed or by word, mission is what we're commanded to do. Jesus told us at the end of Matthew that we all had to go, that he was going to be with us as we went. But as we went, our job was to share, to gospel, to baptize, and above all, to make disciples in his name. So it's not an option. Nonetheless, if you're anything like me, you've experienced mission with a series of waves of fear. The first one is, of course, we all know that you can't do mission until you've attended Mission 101 and have learned about words like Sabellarianism. Now, Matthew knows what Sabellarianism is, I think. Yeah. Of course, actually, none of the first disciples knew any of these strange words either, and they seem to have done a pretty good job of missioning. You might have actually experienced missioning in the way that I did when I first became a Christian. I had been an atheist, I'd been a heckler at the local Christian union, and when I became a Christian, the first thing that they all encouraged, we're going to go and tell the rest of the university about Jesus. Yay! I knew I sort of wanted to be there, so I did turn up, which is more than quite a few of them, but I sort of hid at the back while they all sort of shouted at people as we went past. And I wasn't sure whether this was the most effective form of mission. I was absolutely certain I was deeply embarrassed, as I'm sure you would have been as well. When Diane and I what actually brought us together was a mission, ultimately, in the Isle of Man. So we share that with Matthew and Sarah. One of the missioners there was training us to not to do anything else other than how to help people realize that they were making a commitment to Jesus. And he described how he went around in a previous mission and was despairing because they'd got so many people coming forward. They called in people and they said, "Look, if you know Jesus and if you are willing to come forward, then please come and be a missionary." And there was a vicar there with some poor new Christian, or somebody sort of trying to work out whether they were a Christian, And the vicar said, "Well, it's quite complicated because we start with soteriology, and the soteriology traces its way back to the very first part of the scriptures. You actually need to start thinking about Adam and Eve and about the theonomy that was actually invited for them to join, but the autonomy that they chose to follow. And the rest flows from." He walked on a little bit further and he said, "There's a girl there, a young girl, and she was saying, 'Look, it's like this. I've done things wrong. Jesus died on the cross for me, and now I've got life and hope and purpose and meaning, and it really is just amazing.' And after a while he pulled her to us and he said, 'Why weren't you here at the beginning? You're just such a natural counsellor.' She said, 'Well, I wasn't a Christian at the beginning of the week.'" That's how easy it is to be a missionary. So I want you to look at your passage, and I'm going to split the psalm into 3 parts. I'm going to start right in the middle, which is the obvious place to start, I guess, at verse 15. And I want you to look at verse 15 to verse 21 as one chunk. I'm calling this section Mission by Proclamation, which is probably our most familiar part of how we do mission. Now, mission by proclamation means actually being able to speak out in some way and to tell people of the good news, the wonderful, joyful news about Jesus. And you'll see that the psalmist, remember the psalmist is writing about 1,000 years before the full revelation of Jesus Christ. That doesn't mean, of course, that he's not inspired by Jesus and that his words aren't pointing to Jesus. Quite the reverse. It means entirely that he is pointing to Jesus. But he also has experience, therefore, of God as his Saviour, which is what you all share with Jesus, with me, and with each other. And so he declares what he knows. Now, maybe he doesn't know a huge amount, but what he does know is my mouth will tell of your righteous deeds, your saving acts. I don't know how to relate them all, there's so many, but I want to proclaim your righteous deeds, your marvellous deeds. I want to declare your power to the next generation. Just for a moment, look around and see where the next generation is that you're going to declare to. You know, one of the most powerful things that grandparents can do is talk to grandchildren. One of the most powerful things you can do is to model a love of Jesus and a love of your grandchildren. And you, as grandparents, have time for them when parents are too busy having to do all the other things that parents have to do. It's one of the great privileges of Christian grandparents. So declaring your power to the next generation, your mighty acts to all who are come. And what you see in that passage is, first of all, it declares the very nature of God himself. You'll see how many times that God is described as righteous. He does what is right. He's just. He's holy. He's good. He's true. He's also, of course, so holy that inevitably there is going to be some reaction against that which is unholy. But here, our psalmist is describing how he has been moved by God's actions in his life and in other people's lives. So here is the clue for you. When you are being a missionary, and you don't use that language, when you're just simply talking about Jesus, it's what has happened to you and perhaps to your family, your friends. You can share somebody else's experience. My wife, da-da-da-da-da-da, my friend, da-da-da-da, whatever, or I. That actually is one of the most powerful forms of testimony, what Jesus has done for you. And look, remember this psalmist is writing 1,000 years before Jesus. Nonetheless, he is moved by the Spirit of God in verse 20 to say that no matter what has happened, though you've maybe seen troubles many and bitter, you will restore my life again from the depths of the earth. You will bring me up again. You heard last week Matthew was saying about when you see this word about going into the depths, and how he linked it to Jonah chapter 2, that this depths is usually talking about what's sometimes called Sheol. It's the place of death. It's the place where, in fact, conventionally people are supposed to think it's a one-way ticket. And yet he here, by faith, sees that you will restore my life again. From the depths of the earth, you will bring me up. Literally and truthfully for us in Jesus Christ, he has raised us from the dead, so we shall not die forever. We will die physically, but we will not die forever. We have not just a vague hope, but that certainty, that guaranteed by the very resurrection of Jesus and effected by his death on the cross. There it is. And I want you to think in terms, therefore, you've got here experience, you've got content, and you've got the very nature of God himself. And that's within each one of you. If you want to find an example in the New Testament of what's going on here, look up Acts chapter 19 and you'll find that there is St. Paul in Ephesus and he's busily proclaiming. But look again at what he proclaims. He proclaims what he knows, what he's experienced, and what he's experienced together as a community, because our community history matters as well. Well, moving on then. What's left of the psalm, the little tail end, verses 22 to 24, turns out to be a different way of doing mission. But it's the natural follow-on from the personal experience of mission by proclamation. This is mission by praise. This might not seem to be the most natural way of doing it, but in actual fact, praising God is one of the most powerful ways, again, even more sometimes than proclamation. You look and see what he says. After all he's been through, remember the first 14 verses of our psalm were pretty bad news. We're going to go back to those in just a minute. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten them. He says, I'll praise you with the harp of faithfulness, my God. I will sing praise you with the lyre, Holy One of Israel. My lips will shout for joy. I just can't stay quiet when I sing praise to you. I whom you have delivered. My tongue will tell of your righteous acts all day long. For those who wanted to harm me have been put to shame and confusion. So, what you can see there is that the psalmist is turning naturally to praise. As soon as he starts to think what God has done for him, as soon as you start to think what Jesus has done for you, and you begin to go back, you find that you are led again to praise. And you know that praise is one of the most powerful instruments you have. Just simply not trying to sort of set out to convert somebody, because you can't anyway. It's only God who does that for them. But praising your God, because genuinely you have something to praise him about, actually is a powerful instrument. Again, if you want to look up Paul's ministry, look up Paul and Silas. Do you remember? Sitting in prison. Do you remember? So there they are, they're sitting in prison. They have been wrongly accused, wrongly imprisoned, falsely imprisoned because there was no proper trial, beaten, which was illegal anyway, because they were Roman citizens, beaten, and then thrown into jail and thrown into the innermost part of the jail. And what did they do? They spent the night singing and praising God. I want you to just pause and think, singing and praising God after, I don't know about you, I don't probably say, this is not fair, it's really not fair, why is God in all this? No, they sing and praise God because they go back to what God has done in the past, and they sing. When the earthquake comes and the doors fly open, not a single prisoner rushes out. Now, why do you think that was? It wasn't that all the prisoners were sitting there going, oh, we're too good to escape. There's something about the praise of God from Paul and Silas has actually arrested the prisoners. And what happened, of course, is the jailer comes out, draws his sword to kill himself because it's the only way to save his family. Under Roman law, basically, if you killed yourself, you spared your family. But if you were then found guilty and you hadn't killed yourself, your family usually died with you. So that's why he draws his sword to kill himself. It's the way of sparing everybody around him he loves. Paul shouts out from the darkness, we're still in here! Spare yourself. He rushes forward, and what does he do? Drops at the feet of Paul and Silas, who have been praising God under this strange circumstances. And the prisoners are there. We learn that later on the Philippian jailer will be baptized along with all his family, and I suspect not a few of those prisoners as well. Otherwise, why will they not escape? So suddenly we see the power of praise. That God, when he is praised, brings the hearts of others into conformity to his will. You are missioners when you proclaim Christ and when you praise Christ. Well, there's a great big chunk of the psalm that I haven't even got to deal with. So let's go back to it, verses 1 to 14. And this third part is mission by perseverance. Mission by perseverance. And I told you the other tool power. I said proclamation is one of the most powerful tools you have. Praise is even more powerful, and perseverance is even more powerful still, which is why I left it to the end. It's also the hardest. In fact, we saw some of it with Paul and Silas because they were sitting there praising God under adversity. This is mission by perseverance through persecution and all the other problems that beset us. And this really separates out the sheep from the goats. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the way this psalm is constructed. You will find in a number of places what's called an inclusion. or an envelope. It's where a similar phrase is used in order to show that the whole has a harmony. And there are two here. In verse 1, you can see, let me never be put to shame. And then in verse 13, may my accusers perish in shame, and use exactly the same word. And then you'll see at the very end of our psalm, which I've just lost now, have been put to shame and confusion. So that triple use of the word shame is actually drawing the psalm together. There are other examples as well, but if I committed to those, it would be in the Bible study, wouldn't we? Now, lots of people think that one of the most powerful instruments in proclaiming the gospel is signs and wonders. Somebody even wrote a book on this. But in actual fact, if you go into the New Testament and look at all the signs and wonders that were performed by Jesus and by the early apostles, almost none of them actually led to conversion. They led to wonder, amazement, but not conversion. Whereas if you do look and see what does lead to conversion, you'll find that this mission by perseverance under persecution and through problems is the primary time that people have been converted. First of all, of course, it's not just vague. Our psalmist has a founding principle that will actually drive the whole thing. And you'll find this in verse 1, and then it skips a couple of verses. I'm going to read them through to you. So he starts off by setting his principle. In you, Lord, I have taken my refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Skip a verse. Be my rock of refuge to which I can always go. Give the command to save me, for you are my rock and my fortress. For you have been my hope, sovereign Lord, my confidence since my youth. From birth I've relied on you, and brought me forth my mother's womb. I will ever praise you. Onwards, verse 8, my mouth is filled with your praise, declaring your splendour all day long. And do not be far from me, my God. Come quickly, God, to help me. So there you see, right the way through, and only in verse 14, as for me, I will always have hope. I will praise you more and more. You can see the link between praise and this perseverance through persecution. He knows God. He knows what God has done in the past, so when he proclaimed, he wasn't just proclaiming something in a vacuum. He's talking about his own personal life. But then you can see the persecution. Now, we don't know quite why he's being persecuted, but it's almost certainly the case that because he's simply been a Christian. But sometimes it can be problems not of our own making, it can be problems even not of our own making, but if there's something else, like the situation upon us with COVID-19, or a whole variety of other things. Or we can, of course, simply be in a position where we have become persecuted because we have stood up to be followers of Jesus. It does happen, and you need to budget for it. So his persecution is to be found, for instance, in verse 2, in your righteousness rescue me, deliver me, turn your ear to me and save me. And then he goes on, deliver me, my God, from the hand of the wicked, from the grasp of those who are evil and cruel. And then jumps on again, I have become a sign to many. That's not a positive sign, it's a negative sign. You can translate it elsewhere as portent. I have become a portent to many. You are my strong refuge. But everybody looks at me and goes, poor guy. My mouth is filled with your praise, declaring, do not cast me away when I am old. Remember what he said? That he had praised him since he was young. Do not forsake me when my strength is gone, for my enemies speak against me. Those who wait to kill me conspire together. They say, God has forsaken him. Pursue him and seize him, for no one will rescue him. But he's saying, you are my refuge. And then finally, may my accusers perish in shame. May those who want to harm me be covered with scorn and disgrace. He throws it back to God. He trusts God in the midst of this persecution. And you know, this is one of the most powerful tools that you ever have. When persecution comes, when problems come, it always brings exactly the same result. One way or the other, it separates the sheep from the goats. You will either be strengthened in your faith and walk more closely with God, trusting him, even though you don't understand, or you will simply say, it was like a mist in the early morning, and my faith has evaporated. I used to trust God. I used to believe in him, but he let me down. That was what will happen. And you need to be prepared and to have budgeted. You know, my wife actually has a wonderful testimony, which you have to hear from her own lips at some stage. But she sat down as a teenager, and the Methodist minister that happened to be running their Bible study said, look at all of you, you will say you're strong Christians now, but I can tell you now, they're all teenagers, I can tell you now that most of you will not be acknowledging Jesus in the way you are now when you are even just a few years older. Diane sat there and she said, I'm not going to be one of them. And so she strengthened and worked on her faith, and it grew, and all the others fell away. If our faith is meaningful, it will sustain us during hard and difficult times. But if our faith is not meaningful, then as soon as we put the weight on it, it breaks. And it's not the strength of faith, of course, it's the strength of our God in whom we've placed our faith. So if you want to find an example of this, find 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and see St. Paul describing there, remember I've used him 3 times now, see St. Paul describing there all the things he's been through, and any reasonable person would have said, and that's enough, I've done enough, and he just says no. But it is not, he said, grace that is working within me, that is driving me, and I have heard God tell me that my power is in your weakness, my strength in your sadness. God is working in Paul through the very persecution, and his strength is drawn from the Lord. And it's the same for us. And look how powerfully Paul's ministry was. It wasn't that he was a super intelligent person, though he was actually. It wasn't that he was actually a dedicated missionary, though he was, of course. It was because he had the strength of faith in the unchanging gift of Christ that meant that he was prepared to stand. My own personal testimony actually owes something to that. As an atheist, beginning to move into a sort of a slightly vague position, I came across a lady who had lost her husband. And in the midst of having lost her husband, instead of turning away from God, she turned to him. And as a result, as she prayed and praised, and I saw that she was reaching out and touching a rock I could not see, I, in the end, opened my heart because the Lord was calling me to be one of his followers. She turned me through her perseverance under persecution and problems. And so can you. Today we are called to not be special people who go out and have special degrees in missiology. We're called to be God's faithful people who, by the experience we have shared together with the people around us, our families, the younger generation, to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ, to praise the living God for all that he has done for us, and to grow in faith so that in persecution we will persevere and be able to stand and say, I don't know what's happening, but I do know that God is good, God is my rock, God is my refuge, and I will continue to praise him with the stories of his gracious and righteous and saving acts.